Latch the windows, lock the doors, and put the kids to bed. It's time for another episode of
Tales from the Garage!
Guys, I'm back. Yipes, it's cold out here. I know what you're thinking. For like the last, 6 videos, I think I've been saying this is the last time this year from the garage. But really, this time it is. We had our couple day spell of, I really did no preparation. I just came out here and decided I'm going to do this, and I'm still shivering. I didn't even bring my hot tea or coffee with me or anything. I just prefer doing them out here. This is an encapsulated world with no clock and no windows to the outside world. Could be 3 in the morning or 3 in the afternoon. You never know. And I like it. Can't hear the phone ring, nothing. There's no phone out here. So here I am. Oh, man, I'm cold. It's cold. So, again, this is my last time this year. Empty promise, I know, which maybe sounds a bit like it's the Rolling Stones or The Who's last tour ever, final tour, or Kiss, our final tour. I think The Who started doing their final tours. Well, David Bowie was one big one for announcing final tours too. I know the Who started doing their final tours before the early 1980s, but I know the early 1980s were one of their final tours. And despite the death of 2 band members, they're still touring. Okay, vinyl pulls. I guess I like being out here, but one of the big reasons why I prefer doing videos out here for all the reasons I mentioned, the kind of isolation and the capsule. I'm in a capsule here. Is, of course, because this is the only place where I could do kind of random vinyl pulls from. So the inside videos are different, quite different. Okay, so I'm just going to start, do a few vinyl pulls, and try to avoid getting pneumonia. Not an ECM. I don't have a lot. I have a handful of vinyls of Stan Getz, the late great saxophone player, which I bought this while he was still alive. This is, I think, one of the slightly more obscure ones, and this is one. Gee, I wish I knew that I was going to pick these out in advance. This one was on an obscure label because Stan Getz had a lot of sales in the early '60s, and because of his reputation holding as one of the better-known jazz folks, he did have quite a lot of releases on major labels in America, but this one is on the Tiny Jazzmen label, a label that I guess isn't around anymore. There's another label I didn't, where is it, the logo? A label I didn't think much about until now, and I realized, though, in the early 80s, when I was buying, various jazz albums, pretty much mainstream stuff, that I did see quite a few releases on this label, and I don't recall seeing that carry over into the CD era, so I wonder what happened to them. This one was a little bit different from him. It's got it's got some liner notes. They're a little hard to read, actually. It doesn't show up there, but the print is tiny, and it's against kind of the dark green. So it goes into the history a bit of Stan Getz. And this is quite a different studio recording for him. Let me see. When were these done? Looks like 79. And most, if not all, of the music was written by a composer named Jure Hanstra. So a bit unusual in that this isn't a typical Stan Getz performance of jazz standards or a small group thing, which is pretty much live. Most of Stan Getz's recordings, being from the generation he's from, whether they were live or in the studio, are basically live performances of a current band, of a quartet or 5-piece or 6-piece, whatever he had. So, but the music on here, I remember reading about this, and I don't know if it was before or after I bought it, but I don't recall whether or not I was seeking out this particular album, but I think I was, and damn it, I seem to remember once the CD era started that I did look for this on CD. I do believe that it was released on CD, but it was like one of those things that came out and was immediately out of print and very, very expensive to buy whatever remaining copies are available and people are willing to part with. It's not a long album. It's under 40 minutes. Looks like there's 9 tracks on there. And again, all this is music arranged and composed, arranged and conducted by this Jure Hanstra, who also produced the recording. And this was done in Holland. And I'm not going to read all the musicians. There's a lot of musicians. This is a much bigger ensemble. So I wouldn't compare it to the CTI records, because the way most of the CTI records worked in the 70s and 60s was that there was kind of a basic jazz group of 4, 5, 6 pieces, and then they added on the orchestrations. For this, I think the orchestrations are already there. They're an integral part of the composition. So there's Stan on tenor saxophone, and there's a concert master. I haven't heard. I remember really. As a matter of fact, I think this was my favorite Stan Getz album. At one point, there's a couple. It varies. The supporting group actually varies track to track. So it's more of the Jure Hanstra compositions with Stan Getz playing along to these, what I recall, is highly orchestrated things, but with also a base of a jazz group, I believe. Boy, I really want to hear this again now. I remember this being my favorite Stan Getz album. But it's got acoustic piano, electric piano, guitars, bass, naturally. Jure Hanstra, the composer, in addition to composing, arranging, conducting, and producing the album, also plays drums, percussion, and piano. So there's quite a few different guitarists that appear on the album, even synthesizer, bass drums. So it's kind of like a modern thing. All originals, no standards. Gee, I really remember loving this album. I wish I had a working turntable. And did I mention its title? It's called Forest Eyes. If you see a cheap copy available on CD, don't buy it because I want to get it. Yeah, this is one I remember looking at as soon as I switched over to CDs, and I couldn't get it back then. Any known names? Well, Victor Jones is on drums on some tracks. Like I said, this is like as much a Jure Hanstra album as it is a Stan Getz album. The only people, these are mostly, I'm guessing, musicians from the Holland area. On one track, it looks like one track though, actually the same track that has Victor Jones on drums, Chuck Loeb does play guitar, and Andy Laverne plays electric piano. And Chuck Loeb and Andy Laverne were actually in Stan Getz's band at the time of this, in the late 70s. I know about 79. There's a concert called the Riviera Concert that I believe was recorded in 1979 or 80. I want to say 80. That there's like 90 different versions of it out there with different tracks. And it was a jazz festival, the star of which was Stan Getz. But when they released the albums, from that jazz concert. And I don't know how long a jazz concert was. It was like probably a full day kind of affair. There's all these different versions of the concert on single CDs. Now, obviously, the entire day couldn't fit on one CD, so you get all these different variations on the Riviera concert. Though most of them have some of the Stan Getz material, and then some additional tracks with the other musicians that performed there. Though it's kind of odd the way some of these companies put this Riviera concert out there. And that was the Riviera concert at the time was a time when Chuck Loeb and Andy Laverne were in Stan Getz's band, so almost a little bit more of a fusion flavor to it. The only unfortunate thing was that it was one of those open-air jazz concerts. Wasn't incredibly well recorded. But I really like the Riviera concert. Like I said, there's about 50 different versions of it out there. All of the versions have some of the Stan Getz material, but most of them don't have all of the Stan Getz material. Just some of it. So I had, years ago, cobbled together. I have probably 5 or 6 different Riviera concert albums. One of them was titled Autumn Leaves. So you don't even know that it's the Riviera concert unless you start reading the credits, because they did play a version of Autumn Leaves at the concert live. And I kind of cobbled together for myself a more or less complete version of all of Stan Getz's appearances at the concert, because he played with his band at the time, which included Andy Laverne and Chuck Loeb. And then he did some other appearances, I seem to recall, with some of the other musicians who had appeared at the Riviera concert. And so I kind of cobbled together Stan Getz's complete appearances from that concert, which was just one day, and all of the other tracks from the other various bands. And I filled up 2 CDs. And the weird thing is all these different versions of the Riviera concerts, none of them come anywhere close to like filling the capacity of a CD. So it's kind of a ripoff in a way. You keep on getting these like 45-minute CDs or 50-minute CDs when they could have included a lot more material. But it was just one of those things. And now that I think of it, I had actually... some of the credits on the Riviera concert albums were incomplete. And way, 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 way back, when the internet first really hit, not everybody was on it. I remember, now that I think about it, actually emailing the late Chuck Loeb, who got back to me, asking him a question about the Riviera concert, because I forget what it was. I was unsure if Chuck Loeb had played on a couple tracks, or if he was on the kind of encore, where all the musicians come out and they do a big long jam for like 10 minutes. And I wasn't sure if Chuck Loeb was in the supporting band of that jam or something like that. And I remember emailing him, and he gave me an answer, which now, of course, I forgot. But it was really cool. I guess that was the days when Chuck wasn't quite as well known as he became. He wasn't quite yet at that point the smooth jazz superstar, and it was long before he joined Foreplay. But he gave me a really nice response from what he could remember, because at that point it was 1980, so the concert had been probably done 20 years prior. But I kind of in the email explained to him, well, I'm trying to cobble together what you're playing on and in this Stan Getz concert, because all of the CDs that came out have incomplete musician credits. So he was very cool with that. It's funny how memories get triggered from these things. Forest Eyes. If you see a cheap, sealed, new copy of it on CD, let me know, because I got to get it. This was a really good album. Quite different, with no jazz standards, electric piano, synthesizers, guitars, some modern stuff going on. It's basically the Jerry Hanstra, I guess, album featuring Stan Getz as the primary lead voice and soloist, I guess, is really the way you would explain what it is. And I paid $7.49 at Discomat for, so that was kind of expensive at the time. Which kind of means that was right on the cusp of the CD era, because that's what the albums were going for there. Really, just at the time that CDs hit. But of course, this probably, I'm guessing this didn't initially come out on CD. I don't necessarily think this was released. I could be wrong. right after it was recorded in 79, or maybe at least in this country, in the U.S., it may have taken a few years to come out after its recording. Great, great album, though. Oh, no, what is it? Oh, this is weird. It is weird. I was just listening to this album 2 days ago. My man, Anthony Phillips, 1984, one of his least Anthony Phillips-like albums. If you're familiar with Anthony Phillips, I was referenced the fact that he was an original Genesis member, but then people were like, oh, did he play on Mama? And all that crap. No. Anthony Phillips was the founding member of Genesis only on their first 2 albums, which, no, it didn't include any of their wonderful hit singles from the 80s. I think he left the band. It was 1970 when he left the band. So he was on from Genesis to Revelation and Trespass. And Trespass was really the thing that set the band's sound in motion. If you pick up just about any of their 70s albums, even after Anthony Phillips left, the presence and the kind of direction and sound that he created with the band was still in evidence for years after he left. And that is one of their kind of signature sounds was a lot of, especially 12-string acoustic guitars, played by himself and bassist Mike Rutherford. And they always do this kind of beautiful blanket. And even Tony Banks, keyboardist Tony Banks, was playing some acoustic guitar in these early albums. And they would create this incredible blanket of acoustic guitars over with, the rhythm section would play and, the vocals would go and everything. And it was a very, to me, British pastoral sound. And Anthony Phillips left the band in 1970. I wouldn't say he disappeared, but he went to seriously study music at that time. And finally in 1977, he started releasing solo albums, but it was a good 7 years where after he left Genesis, he was totally unheard from. And so when he came out with his earlier albums, his first solo albums, though, if you were keen on the Genesis Trespass era, though, right away you would say, oh man, this sounds like Genesis Trespass without the vocals. Most of his music at the time when he started, he'd do a couple vocal songs, but primarily instrumental and mostly acoustic. And that's something that stayed throughout his career, where he still does a lot to this day. Sometimes exclusively, he has albums out to this day that are instrumental and acoustic, though he does incorporate synthesizers into other albums of his and other works of his, depending on what the direction is. But this is the only album he ever did that is like this, and this is totally electronic, synthesized keyboards. And I bought this when it came out. I think it was 79. Let's see. Passport Records. No, 1981. So it's weird because you're projecting into the future, but only by 3 years. So now in 1984, which at the time sounded very futuristic, even 3 years ahead of schedule, now looks like a relic of the past. And in a way it is, because it's so typical. I believe this is the only time that I can recall hearing a drum machine, an early 1980s style drum machine, on any of Anthony Phillips's work. He was trying to sound modern, contemporary, and do an electronic album that kind of, I guess, presented the future, or the very nearby future. So instead of going into that acoustic mode, which obviously recalls earlier times and more classical than futuristic, he pretty much dispensed with all of the acoustic. There's no acoustic guitar in here. There's actually very little electric guitar on here, very little at all. And it's pretty much all keyboard synthesizers, very electronic, no piano sounds or anything, and the drum machine. And there's like 2 very small thematic tracks, one 2.5 minutes, one 4.5 minutes, and then 2 long tracks, 15.5 minutes and 19 minutes. And those are kind of like suites. And I remember buying this because I already had I guess, quite at least maybe 3 of the prior albums that Anthony Phillips had out. Once he started recording in 77, man, the floodgates were open, you know. Nobody heard from him for 7 years, and then all of a sudden, boom, 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 here's all these Anthony Phillips releases, which, oddly enough, for some reason, I can recall seeing in the record store before I even knew who Anthony Phillips was, before he was even into Genesis. I just remember there was, I guess it was, there must have been a Genesis fan or something like this. There's one particular record store that I used to go to called Harmony Hut, which was a chain, which didn't last long. They were around for a while. But I think Harmony Hut was pretty much gone by the time the CD era hit even. But it was a good chain, a bit expensive, like a lot of the retail chains are. And when Anthony Phillips came out here in 77, his first 2 albums actually kind of came out in the U.S. almost, I think, simultaneously, even though they were totally unrelated albums. One was an album that had some more vocal works on it, as well as this acoustic thing. And then the second album was his first in his long series called Private Parts and Pieces, which are short instrumental tracks, pretty much all acoustic instrumentation, which is Anthony Phillips playing guitars and keyboards. And it's funny because Anthony Phillips is quite a damn good keyboard player as well. He also plays other instruments in addition to guitars, other stringed instruments. Quite a talent. To me, by far, Anthony Phillips is the most talented member ever to come out of Genesis. I have to get, as much as I love Steve Hackett and some of Tony Banks's like orchestral solo albums, I got to give Anthony Phillips the thumbs up over those 2 guys. And he's got a long series of album releases that kind of bear out just how great he really is, including he's done a lot of albums that are he's created a lot of library music, which is music that goes kind of into the vaults, always pretty much short pieces, and they're used. They're not created for specific television programs or movies, but they're put into a bank for producers of TV and movies to find music to use for their productions that's already created. It's cheaper than hiring a composer to write specific themes. So Anthony Phillips has done a lot and continues to do a lot of library music in between recording his main albums. And a lot of that library music has come out. Really great stuff. I guess the only shortcoming with it is the fact that those tracks are so short. They're often, 2 minutes in duration. And they're definitely themes that could be expanded on. But they're short because they were basically created for music libraries. And he's got a series, and that Private Parts and Pieces may contain some of those, but he's also got a second series that he's done, which, damn it, I can't think of the name of it now. That is another series like the Private Parts and Pieces series, which is an ongoing series of albums consisting of mainly these shorter pieces. And I believe the source of the series was primarily the work that he did for television and movies. So it's called Missing Links. And he's got a series called Missing Links that is somewhere around 4 or 5 volumes of that, where the Private Parts and Pieces series is well over a dozen now. And I believe that earlier Missing Links series is probably a lot of his library music, because they're short tracks, very cinematic in quality, a lot of acoustic-oriented things, but also synthesizer-oriented things. And oddly enough, the Missing Links albums, all 4 of them, there's not a Duff album in the batch. They're actually some of my favorite albums of his. Though sometimes you're buying, they also have subtitles, and a lot of the albums get sold under the subtitle names, and you're not even aware that they're part of this Missing Links series. It's not apparent until after you buy it and you see Missing Links Volume 3 or whatever listed on it. But the Missing Links stuff is really amazing. This is quite interesting, totally unlike... it's unusually cold for Anthony Phillips. Cold and electronic. Synthesizers sound okay for early... my big bugaboo is, man, I really hate the way early 1980s synthesizers sound. And this is definitely 1980s synthesizers, early 80s. But Anthony he's got a good ear, so he does a better job than most of the folks that were using them at the time at creating a bit more of a thicker sound on the synthesizers. But I think, when you put it on, if you weren't aware of when it was recorded, you know anything about synthesizer music and you've been listening for a long time, you could definitely say, oh, that's from the early 80s. But it's one of those albums that it's so funny because it was only like 2 days ago that I listened to the whole album. It's gotten re-released several times on CD, and I think I bought the first CD version, which is just the album, the vinyl album, and I even got the second CD version, which has 2 CDs, and one's the original album and one's a bunch of demos and stuff like that, which demos of the album and early mixes. I never understood the reason for early mixes. It's one thing to do an alternate mix, but an early mix is just a working mix when you're working on the album and you're getting an idea of whether it needs any more parts or whether what's there is good or do I have to redo parts. So they create this early mix, and they're pretty much useless. They sound terrible. They're just there for reference, and it's the kind of thing that you might listen to once, maybe twice. But there's that, and naturally I had to buy it because it was Anthony Phillips. Not that I have everything his. But, it's an interesting album. Not an album to pick up to get an idea, though, of what his music sounds like, because he hasn't done another album at all like that. I'm really yapping here, and I've only done 2 albums. I'm going to pick out a third one and hope maybe it's something I have no recollection of. Who knows? There, over here. I can't even get the discs out of there. They're so tight in there. Oh, damn, that thing was fighting me all the way. Well, I had to pick out an ECM, because after all, this is my last. Oh, damn, those things are tight in there. My last one for this year in the garage. Of course, I say that now, right? I can talk a little bit about this. Jack DeJohnette's first special edition album on ECM, recorded in, I want to say, March 1979. Mostly, 5 longish songs, 2 of them actually John Coltrane tracks, and the other 3 Jack DeJohnette originals. He does a version of John Coltrane's Central Park West and India. And this was his first album with a kind of a new concept, because he had Directions prior to this, the band, and New Directions, which kind of had a revolving membership in them, though guitarist John Abercrombie was in both of them. But this time he decided to form a very different band, one with him on drums and occasionally keyboards. So I think he only plays piano on one track, and he plays the melodica, that thing you blow into, on another track. But primarily just heard on drums. Like I said, the piano's on one of the Coltrane tracks. He has Peter Warren, who plays upright bass and cello. So you got a rhythm section there, and 2 saxophone players. So there's no full-time keyboard player. There's no guitar. The front line is really saxophone, and at times he had, depending on which version of the band and which album you're talking about, at times he would have as many as 3 horn players. Sometimes, I'm trying to recall if all 3 of them were ever saxophone players that doubled on other instruments. I know at times he had a trumpet player and 2 saxophone players. The personnel always kind of changed. Every album had different, at least one change in personnel. But on this one, he's got David Murray, who must have been pretty young when he did this, on tenor saxophone and bass clarinet. Maybe a little bit of the spirit of Eric Dolphy in there. And Arthur Blythe on alto saxophone. So this is very saxophone-led music. And when I think of Jack DeJohnette on ECM, now Jack DeJohnette did record a few albums as a leader prior to ECM. Those were very much in the free jazz mode, and if you don't like free jazz, you wouldn't like those albums. A lot of improvising, a lot of jamming, kind of a lot of screeching saxophones and things like that. When he came to ECM, the albums that he recorded weren't quite as free as his pre-ECM albums. But I think of all his ECM ones, this is probably the most free jazz. But I think in general, his first three or four albums as special edition contained more of the free jazz elements than the other albums he would do. And that could be because this was a saxophone-led band, and the saxophone players that he brought in to the band, even trumpeter Bakita Carroll, who plays on one of the albums, he always seemed to select musicians that had their roots in that free jazz stuff. So it's a bit more wild and free and honking and noisy and loud than pretty much all his other albums. In terms of bands, and I guess when you're dealing with his other groups, that were maybe a guitar or keyboards or something like that, the nature of the instruments themselves don't lend themselves to the kind of wild, screeching saxophone that you get on here. So this, to me, is an acquired taste. I listened to it a lot, and I do have it on CD. I bought the CD edition when it came out. Now it's available in a box set with two or three of their other albums. I think there's 4 special edition albums in the box set, which I would like to get because I still don't have, oddly enough, on CD because it was never available singularly. My favorite of the special edition albums, which is called Inflation Blues. And even though that's a free album as well, there's just something about that album that works for me much better than the other 3 special edition albums. Though if I wanted to hear some kind of wild, free Jack DeJohnette, this is the wildest I think he ever got on ECM. His original tunes, which are all fairly longish, 8 minutes 44 seconds, 9 minutes 51 seconds, 11 minutes 23 seconds. His 3 originals on here, kind of all, they have a theme that they start with, and then it just goes crazy with the soloing and the saxophones, and the 2 saxophone players sometimes playing simultaneously, just totally improvising wild stuff. Got to be in the mood for it. And certainly not like mellow nighttime music. Like, let me play an album before I go to sleep. This isn't it, because this will keep you up all night. Man, I just, I didn't want to go over 30 minutes. And again, with this computer, I don't even know if it's working. But I guess if you're watching this, it worked. And if you're not watching it, it didn't work. So here I am, freezing my tail off once again. Playing to whatever, so you can hear it, some unreleased music of my own in the background, as always. And I think this is my toes are actually cold this time. So I think I just don't want to give up the garage, And I actually have 2 space heaters, but one year I used them for a few hours on 2 different days in the course of the month, and it literally doubled my electric bill. I couldn't believe it's like these heaters should have a little coin counter on them, like the national debt or something like that. It shows you how much you're spending every damn second the thing is on, and they still didn't really help much. I had to have them like shooting at my feet for me to feel anything, because this space is a bit too large for the 2 heaters to really heat the whole space. That's such is life, right? So I'll be inside probably from now till whenever it starts to warm up out here. hey, who knows? With the way the weather's been, we might end up getting a 70-degree day sometime in mid-January. And if we do, I'll try to rush out here. Who knows? Thanks for watching. I'll be back, and I swear next time I'm back, I'll be inside. Take care.
Tune in next time for more
Tales from the Garage.